your name and how you want to be identified.
My name is Don DeBar. It's D as in David, E, B as in Bob, A-R. I'm the former, say that again, I'm the former news headlines editor at WBAI FM for a morning show.
The so-called internal conflict at WBAI and at the heart of Pacifica Radio at this point, December 2010. How will you describe it?
It's an interesting time. I don't know how many people have followed the latest round, basically, of the takeover by a small group of people from California of the network, and then of the network over the local controls of the local stations. But beginning in maybe March of 2009, a group that had just attained a majority control of the Pacifica National Board and many of the local station boards began to act in earnest against the people who were the management of the company at that time, or of the foundation at that time, and particularly against the programming across the network. Grace Aaron, because she was chosen by this group to be the head of the Pacifica National Board, when the office of Executive Director of Pacifica was vacated under California law, became the de facto Executive Director of the Foundation. From that position, she essentially conducted a takeover and purge at several stations. WBAI's began in March and was completed more or less by June of 2009. The conditions have basically seen this control express itself more fully through the radio station's programming, through the conduct of fundraising, through the management of the station. And then the elections this past year, suddenly there seems to be a shift in momentum. The group that had lost control of the network in the 2007 elections, in 2008, when they actually attained the majority, they did not do as well in the elections as they had thought. At WBAI, we were able to increase our position to where we thought we were one vote shy of even at the in terms of votes at the local station board level. As it turns out, at our first meeting, which was held this past Wednesday, December, whatever day that is, December 8th of 2010. We found out that in fact we have a deadlocked board. One member of their faction has apparently abandoned ship and is voting with us. This led to a very interesting meeting where the side that represents the former producers and the former management of the station were able to choose the officers that are going to run the LSB over the next year. And we see that the situation that we faced, being one vote shy and having the first alternate position, is also where the KPFK local station board is at. So we see some possibilities evolving here.
Because the programming changes made by Grace Aaron and friends appear to be irreversible, at least for the time being. When they had the overwhelming support of local and national board members, the changes were done with a blessing, and now with us, the tide turns as there is a different kind of power at the local and national level. Still, you hear the people making the decisions, the programming decisions in the stations are saying, hey, the bylaws do not call for the board telling the station what to put on the air. You cannot decide and design the programming of the station from the board. And yet, before with the support of the board, and now with half of the support of the board, they continue to get away with making the changes that they want to make. So what do you think of that?
Well, it's interesting because at the basis of it, essentially they're saying now that we have control of management, and you may have control or an equal voice at the local station board level, unlike what we've argued for the previous 5 or 6 years, where when we were on the outs, said that the LSB should have control over programming and management at the stations. Now that the roles are reversed, they are holding the opposite position. But what's interesting is that the change in position of theirs to where they are now inside the halls, so to speak, running, having placed its executive director and new general managers and program directors around the network, that entire change rested upon a purge conducted by an acting executive director. Normally when you have a pro tem executive director at an organization, a corporation, a foundation, whatever, generally they are there strictly in a ministerial position. They sign the paychecks, they make sure the rent gets paid, they pay the phone bill, and they do not make policy decisions. That's for a professional that knows how to manage a corporation of that size, that's been vetted by the board of directors. In the case of Pacifica also, it should be vetted by the listeners and the representatives, because those are the people that pay the bills on an ongoing basis. And there are certain mission objectives that are very near and dear to the listeners and very important to the society, that are very basic considerations for who's going to have that job. All of this was completely ignored, so that you now have people whose power, so to speak, whose authority, as they claim it, rests on a process that had absolutely no authority whatsoever, that was completely irregular or worse, and now saying exactly the opposite of what they were saying only 2 years ago at the top of their lungs. So that's a very interesting little switch in the way things have happened. But watching the rhetorical narrative that's come out of this group, going back to even before the last coup, some of the members that are involved in that, it's not unusual to see them change their position or talk both sides of a position simultaneously if it suits their interests, because they are essentially about their interests, period. And where they are in opposition to the interests of the communities that Pacifica is supposed to serve, particularly, or anyone else that's in their way, then their interests will have out and damn the rest of it.
Let's get down to the specifics. What's the ethnic makeup of most of the programmers at WBAI, the hours in which they have the opportunity to broadcast to New York City and surrounding areas, and who decides who's going to get what?
Well, that, like most of the other things that we're talking about, has changed in the past 2 years, or past year and a half. Previously, Bernard White was the program director at the station at WBAI. Bernard White is an activist of and from the Harlem community, and he's been living in Bed-Stuy for a long time. He's also very active in that community. And, he's in his 60s. He has been active for most of his adult life, and so he has just personally been networked into many activist groups around the city, many communities around the city that are generally in need of something like WBAI, of some place to voice the issues that they have in the face of the assault on these communities by city government, state government, federal government that's taken place going back for as long as I can remember, and probably as long as it's been in New York City. Bernard had acquired some very strong radio skills early in his life, and he's been at WBAI for a good 25 years or longer, and again, with having the perspective of someone that actually has been on the other side of that in the community struggles, has a very good, both a Rolodex, using an old term, full of contacts in various communities of people that are working to deal with education issues, housing issues, job creation issues, all the things that are survival skills basically for the communities in New York City, and some an awful lot of sweat and sweat equity in that kind of activity. So he's very sensitive to the role that the radio station can and should play, and he knows how to program a radio station. Both of these things are very important skills in a program director at a radio station, that's part of Pacifica. He has been the subject of a vilification campaign going back at least to 2002, 2003, conducted largely by a guy named Steve Brown, who is a telemarketer from the New York area, and who is also, from time to time, of record, business partner with Gary Null. You can see the possibilities of someone who telemarkets teaming up with someone like Gary Null, who essentially is on the radio, gaining the confidence of people in opposition to big pharma and the corporate interests that serve the medical needs of the people in this country, if you can call it that, at this time, running an alternate narrative on a station with the credentials of Pacifica stations, and then referring you to a website where you can buy the potions and elixirs that he is selling. The relationship between these two is a marriage made in heaven for commercial purposes. One of the earliest attacks on Bernard White and the stream of attacks that ran up to, and it really is still ongoing, that were hosted by Steve Brown are clearly racist in nature, both overtly and covertly. They use the racist imagery that unfortunately abounds in the United States culture, describing Bernard alternately as a buffoon, as a thug, imagery of him pumping his fist, chasing white women around the office. There's one small Jewish producer, male, who is quoted as, with this little narrative of Bernard following him into the men's room, standing behind him at the urinal, breathing on his neck. This kind of like almost prison rape fantasy language. This is what Steve Brown has conducted against Bernard. And essentially, once they removed Bernard, Gary Null has been brought front and center at WBAI. He had been removed from the air, 3, 4, 5 years ago now, for a number of reasons, but one, I actually witnessed him calling for a boycott of the station's fund drive on his website because he was upset at the time. This is why, I believe this is why, but coincidentally, he was upset that an alternate medical producer was going to be on Wednesdays, so Gary was only going to have 4 one-hour slots a week rather than 5. They stepped up the vilification campaign. The problem with finances that has faced every listener-supported radio, even if it's partially, like NPR, has been suffering. In this recession, that was used as a weapon, placed as basically at Bernard White's feet as his fault, and used to remove him, with the mantra being repeated that we need to change programming to reach a different demographic, meaning because the same people were saying that our station was too black, that we were catering to poor black people and black nationalists instead of to white people who could help to support the station because they were more affluent. The same people were also pointing to a radio station in the Southwest as being perhaps more successful than BAI because they had basically an all-white audience, all-white staff, and all-white management. That there was something somehow intrinsic in diversity that weakened WBAI, and that BAI was catering to the wrong side of that diversity. So this suddenly, that narrative stopped. Activity started that indicated exactly those same actions were being implemented by this new group, while they hired a couple of black faces to front for it, saying, see, look, our new manager is black, our new program director is black, what are you talking about? Our new program director, by the way, is Tony Bates, who prior to his arrival at WBAI in New York City, the largest media market in the United States, prior to his arrival, there never programmed a radio station anywhere on planet Earth. And this important resource to all of these communities is now being programmed by him in New York City. But the changes in particularly in that position and in the upper management at the network are reflected in the programming, because Tony Bates has removed many of the community-based programs in his first year. He just did a rework of the grid, wiped out block from 9 a.m. to noon of programs that ran Monday through Friday. None of them every day either, so you have 2, 3 programs a day that were moved to 11 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, Saturday afternoon, and such, replaced by music. So it's noticeable that there has been a change. The change in the large has been away from community-based programming, away from activist-oriented programming, towards health, guru stuff, Gary Null in particular, but other things. There's a program now that has been expanded, hosted by Kathy Davis. One quote I remember coming out of her mouth a couple of weeks ago was her instructing the audience that they need to learn how to turn off their brain, that they need to learn how to stop thinking, this kind of stuff. That's what's replaced people organizing around rent strikes and things that are absolute survival skills in New York City.
Well, I'm not going to imply that WBAI is the only media outlet that gives alternative points of view in New York City. But given the fact that some Latinos and African American programs have been moved to different hours, reduced, where they have lost part of their audience, if not all their audience altogether, what's the real impact that it will have in New York City in terms of information?
Well, I mean, huge. First of all, the direction of the radio station has been stunted by the internal politics at Pacifica for, I would say, at least the last 7 or 8 years. Bernard White has tried to make some programming changes to accommodate. Look, in New York you have huge Hispanic community, you have huge communities, various Asian communities, Japanese, Chinese, very large populations. Queens, one borough of New York City, is the most diverse county in the country and perhaps the most diverse political unit on the planet. There are maybe 20 languages spoken, from this block to that block to that block. Most of these people are not served by any media at all outside of the internet in the United States. Even some of them have not even their own native language newspapers here yet. That's how diverse New York City is. WBAI needs to be both programming to these communities and also finding ways where each of these communities can speak to the others. Somehow dealing with the language barriers and everything else to do that. And rather than do that, looking at the form or construct that existed of basically white, black, and brown in New York City, moving backwards from that, pushing an emphasis on this to basically the white upper middle class. That's where they're driving the network, because they're looking for people with quote-unquote discretionary income, and it seems clear while they're doing that hand in hand with business that what they're looking to actually do is drop the service that this radio station can and should provide to these many communities, and should be providing even in greater depth, and use it instead as like a way of selling Gary Null products and other similar things to people that can afford them and might be interested in buying them.
Not long ago, our interim program director, Alan Minsky, told us in the community forum that the Pacifica mission does not say that it's supposed to be a voice for the left. What do you say to things like that?
Well, that may or may not be true literally. I think that, first of all, the left is completely underrepresented in the media in the United States, and the left ought to do something about that. So whether Alan Minsky is technically correct about the left being mentioned in the mission statement at Pacifica, the left that considers Pacifica their resource damn well needs to get off its ass and do something about it. And right now they're not doing it. The problem at Pacifica is not some sort of internal, sociopathology that, look, it's Pacifica, that's just the way it is, I don't want to get involved in it. Pacifica is a lifeblood to the progressive movement in this country, and if it isn't connected to the progressive movement, then the tissues of that will die in this country. And it's happening now, and that's why Pacifica is a target of people, both with petty business interests and other people with larger political objectives all the time. And rather than looking at each other as people that we need to be seeing covering our back so that we can do the work that needs to be done out in the world, you have people that are worried about whether I have an hour and a half or 2 hours worth of programming, and that primes everything else. If they take it away from you and give it to me, fine, sorry. I'm seeing that at BAI. What's really cute is that when they did the most recent grid change at WBAI, a number of the affected producers were allies of the group that took over the station. They are basically now beginning to feed on each other. all of a sudden, the cries about the lack of solidarity and the lack of political ethic and such that comes from this group, oh my goodness, the indignation. The same people that when I was removed from my position a year ago, or more than a year and a half almost, had absolutely nothing to say other than, the few that did say anything, that I deserved it. Because I was removed, by the way, because I reported on the fact that the station was being taken over. I used sound from the individual people that were involved. Grace Aaron would go on the air and say she's doing this. I would play the sound. If I had the copy of a memo that she had issued, I would read the memo, making the audience that pays their salaries aware of the fact that this takeover was happening. The news director at WBAI, Jose Santiago, said that he, as a news person, as a journalist, does not think that the internal politics of Pacifica are newsworthy. And he didn't have a response when I asked whether or not the listeners who sponsor the station had the right to know that the management was being changed in violation of the bylaws of it, forgetting even absent that in direct violation of the bylaws, which I could cite and demonstrate that was happening. And they had no answer for that. But that is, more or less what's been happening now. They're feeding on each other. A new group of people is learning why you need worker solidarity, and maybe something will come of it at that level. But I think the more interesting activity is going to take place now with the local station boards, particularly if the possibility of change at that level draws people in that need to be involved every day, putting pressure on them and on management. It's really about the listeners and the people in the communities, the community organizers who need Pacifica to be their ally and their voice box. They need to come in and actually make that happen, because otherwise, like I said, it's going to be gone, and you're going to see tissues of the movement dying all over the country.
Well, let's take a look at the global picture for a moment. The United States exercises an incredible influence in the rest of the world, financially, politically, and militarily. It has a serious impact on the environment because it devours the resources of the planet more than anybody else. And radio, in this world of video and television, most people get their information from television. You would think that why should anybody in the circles of power care about what happens to radio and the radio audience in the United States at all? And yet, whenever there's a military takeover by the United States forces or their proxies, one of the first things they go and seize is the radio stations. Food for thought. But here the question is, all these changes in Pacifica, do you think it happened in a vacuum and nobody in the circles of power has anything to do with it?
Well, let's see. At this particular moment, the capitalist system is at a crisis that it hasn't seen, at least in terms of how it's, the depth of its manifestation, since the so-called Great Depression back in late 1920s, early 1930s through World War II. And yet this is happening, at a key moment in terms of that. So let's say 3 months from now, they decide, the U.S. government decides, the Congress decides, whoever makes the real decisions there, but not to renew unemployment benefits for the 4 million people that are out there. You'll see 2 million people fall off immediately, and then there are millions more that actually are part of that food chain, literally. There will be no means of mass communication other than trying to reach people on the internet whose cable bills have been turned off for non-payment. The last time that you had a takeover of this network, for some reason when the attacks, so-called attacks of September 11, 2001 took place, WBAI, situate on Wall Street, 4 blocks away from the World Trade Center, did not report on that for at least an hour after it happened. At the time that I was listening to the radio on CBS AM radio, 1010 Winds AM radio, flipping back and forth trying to find things, WBAI was playing what the then program director, Utrice Lead, called conservatory level jazz. And the people that worked at WBAI could taste the smoke from the World Trade Centers. That's how close they were to it. Now, that whole coup went down quite a ways before, months before the World Trade Center attacks, so-called. This coup went down about 18 months ago now, 19, 20 months ago now. Yet the things that are, really of huge consequence are about to happen. if there were a media that could communicate to people what's happening when 2 million people suddenly lose their lifeline, and this is unprecedented in this country, and for 70 years, and what is going to happen after that? If they're going to cut Social Security, all these other things that are on the table finally, with a Democratic president and in the aftermath of a Democratic Congress, if Pacifica were just status quo ante a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, there's an awful lot of producers that would be getting an awful lot of people organized awful goddamn fast. And that is not going to happen now. Well, you have producers on the air that are either poisoning themselves with their own products, as apparently Gary Null has been doing, it's according to his own lawsuit, or telling you that you need to turn off your brain and stop thinking. I don't think that it's coincidence. I think there are people with very big ideas of how their power and position is going to be undermined by their own hand at some point in the future, and they're trying to keep themselves where they are. So something like Pacifica that has the potential to organize people in opposition to the paradigm that's crumbling, I think that that's a very important target for them, and I think that they've targeted it and have taken it, and we need to take it back.
Well, at the risk of this recording or your video recording being made at this moment falling into the wrong hands, in your opinion, is there a hope for the mass media or for the alternative media in the United States? Is there anything on the underground that may possibly present some hope for the people in this country?
I think what we need to do is find whatever is available and grab it and hold on to it and work it, to the maximum. And that's going to be a fluid condition, as the entire situation is fluid. But Pacifica is within the reach of people who have already established networks of communication over the last decade, some cases decades, and many of those people, they're still around. It's only been a few months. I think that the fact that this happened and the fact that indicates that there's some design to it, on behalf of the existing power structure, means if they think it's that important, we ought to recognize that it is also. I think there is hope. I think it can be taken back, but I think that people have to stop being complacent about it's going to happen inevitably, get off their asses and do the actual work themselves. And I think everyone who hears this, that thinks that Pacifica is valuable, has an obligation to themselves. And if you've got kids or grandkids, we're talking about some fundamental issues that deal with the survival of humanity as a species, survival of life on this planet. If this capitalist system crumbles, as it seems to be doing, and we have a replay of Germany, for example, in the early 1930s, and there's overt, it's hard to see a big change from where we are to this, but you have an overt fascist global state in place. How much longer is humanity going to survive? It comes down to that. I mean, we need to be looking for whatever weapons we can put our hands on. This is one lever that we already know how to work, and it's still within our reach. And if we can't muster the get up off your ass part enough to make that happen, then, really, I don't think we deserve to continue. So,
from Mexico to Argentina, millions of people have presented and are presenting a challenge to the Yankee Empire. The Europeans are showing some backbone right now, but in the United States, people seem to be sleeping. Their brains are being numbed by some kind of strange smells in the air, or some strange pictures on television, or some microwave radiation coming out of the cell phone towers. Who knows? But the point is, the United States the population appears to be sleeping like zombies. You see any hope, given the fact that from Ronald Reagan to George Bush, there's been at least half a dozen presidential decrees, directives they call it, to declare state of emergency in the United States by the flip of a button. Any hope in the United States, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that sedate is a more accurate word than sleeping, because it is something that's been imposed basically on people. It's not their natural condition. Whether it's been imposed directly or as a consequence of people sitting in the belly of privilege for their whole lives and not understanding their real connection to this planet or the other people on it. And with that said, I think that first of all, I'll put it this way: the two things that I'll use as analogy. you know, famously, a white woman activist went to Malcolm X and asked, you know, what is it that I can do to help with your struggle? And he said, nothing. Go back to your own community and deal with your people. That's what needs to happen. I was in Tripoli in October of 2009 at a conference of international delegates that were there looking at third way politics and economics. And I got out a lot. You know, I went over as a journalist, and I brought my little equipment with me, and I made a point of meeting as many people from as many places as I could, and asked the same question. You know, in a sense, saying, you know, you have the bulk of the people here representing the bulk of humanity who are on the wrong side of the efforts of the United States, militarily, politically, you know, economically, as you put it. What is it that I can do? And they pointed out to me that basically, look, we don't need you to do anything for us here. You're in the belly of the beast. You have work to do that none of us can do because of your proximity to the situation and also because of your internal understanding of it. You grew up in that mess. Fix it. And so, you know, there is hope for humanity, but we can't sit back and wait for humanity to rescue us. We who have benefited from the pillaging of the rest of the planet, from sucking the blood of the people of the rest of the planet, cannot wait for them to come to us on a white steed and save us. We got to save our own asses and help the rest of the world save its own ass, or there's going to be no ass for anybody pretty soon, too.
On a happy note, Don DeBar, thank you so much.
Thank you.